Aloha everybody, this is Gigi from Kauai Community College. In this video, we will be converting from base 16 to base 10. Okay, so suppose you have a question that looks something like this. The number 2D7 in base 16 is what in base 10? And then you would be saying, what is that D doing there, right? So we are saying that number right there in base 16 is what in base 10. Okay, now in order to actually understand what this is all about, we first need to think about the number 2D7 in base 16. What does that mean? It means that the number has 3 place values, 2D7. Okay, how much does each one of these places worth? So that is in base 16, so you would say the first place is ones. They're always ones. Okay, so when we say ones, that would be in base 10, right? It's worth one little single dot. Remember the dots that we have learned? And then in the second place, because we are in base 16, the second place is worth 16. And I'm going to go ahead and use base 10 notation to write up there so that we can understand that a little bit easier. So that is worth 16 little tiny dots, right? Meaning 16 ones will make one of those second place value. And then the third place value in base 16 would be 16 groups of 16. And that is 256. So those are the place value. The question now is, how do we translate that into base 10? And how does base 10 work? Base 10 has ones, right? Tens, 100, 1,000, and so on. Okay? Now, here we have 2 groups of 256, D groups of 16, and 7 singles. So let's go and demystify the D. What is that all about? Well, let's look at base 16 numerals. Okay, so if you are in base 16, you will have 16 numerals, meaning there are 16 symbols that you can use to write a number with. So that will start with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Well, how do we write 10 in base 10? We write 1, 0. But we're just reusing the numeral 1 and the numeral 0. So that's 10. The 1, 0 is not a good numeral. We have to create a new numeral that represents 10 in base 16. So then we would now, and for this class, we will go ahead and use the alphabet after the letters, right? After the numbers. So A would represent 10. And then B would represent 11. And then C, and then D. So D would represent, so C is a 12, and D would be 13. That's the one that we have in our number. And then E would be 14, and then F would be 15, and that is all we have. Because when you hit 16, you will go to the next place value, which would be 1, 0. Right? So those are the only numerals you have. This right here, the last thing here, would be one full group of 16. And that is 1, 0 after F. Okay, so how does that work? Here we have two groups of 256. So we would say that would be 2 times 256. And then we have D groups of 16. So that would be D times 16. But in base 10, if we were now talking in base 10, D means what? D means 13. So you have 13 groups of 16, and then we have 7 singles. 7 times 7 is 7 times 1 is 7. Okay. Again, you have two groups of 256, which would make 512. And then you have 13 groups of 16, which would make 208. Now, where did I get the 13 from? 13 is D. Okay, 13 is D. D means 13 in base 10. Okay, and then the last thing that we need to do is we need to go ahead and add them up and see how all of these place into base 10 right here. Okay, so let's see how that works. We are now all in base 10 in green there. So if we were to add 512 plus 208 plus 7, we have altogether 727. So in base 10, you have 700, 2 tens, and 7 singles. Therefore, our number 2D7 in base 16 is equal to 727 in base 10. And that is how you can convert from one base to another. Understanding place value, know what the numerals are, okay, and translate that into what it means in base 10. In this case, D means 13. That means you have 13 groups of 16. That's this right here. Okay. And then here you have two groups of 256 because that's how place value work. And then you have 7 singles, which would be that. And so in total you have 727. And we can say 727 because that is exactly what these numbers mean. 727.